Welcome everyone. You're watching In the Crosshairs, and I'm your host, Raquel. And my special guest today is Dan Roberts. Dan has been a guest. This is your third time.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm so happy to have you on. So the first time you came on, we talked about guns, mass shootings, and psychotropic drugs, and the effects of psychotropic drugs on children, particularly school. And the second time around, we had a great conversation about the U.S. Supreme Court, some of the picks from the president. Things are still moving forward since then, but I thought that was a fantastic show as well.
Yeah.
Today, we are going to return to the psychotropic drugs topic because we had an incident here in Florida. You gave me a call last week. You said, hey, Raquel, there's something going on. This shooter, guess what? Happened to be on psychotropic drugs. Goes right back into the same topic that we were talking about a couple of weeks ago. So I want you to go ahead, Dan. Topic. Could you just give us a little background about yourself?
I've been a firearms instructor and coach for over a decade. I've written a semi-regular column for AmmoLand.com for, I think, over the last 5 or 6 years.
America's favorite gun blog. AmmoLand.com. I love them. I love those guys. I've written 3 articles for them too.
I used to write a lot more often, but then when I started getting, when I got my kids as a full-time single parent, the time just wasn't there. I've started to try to get back into it as much as I can, but it's still, I'm nowhere near. I used to put out 2 or 3 articles a week when I first started. Now I'm lucky if I can do 2 or 3 a month. And it's not for lack of wanting to do so. It's just simply not having enough hours in the day.
Yeah, I feel the same way too. It's hard. It's hard when life becomes busy. And the writing, it takes time. It takes research. It takes time. So it's not that easy to come up with it, right?
Right.
I feel the same way. I run into that problem all the time. I want to write about a lot of things, but I just simply run out of time.
Yeah.
By story, just take it how it goes. I've been working on a really interesting story. Actually, I've been working on this story for 2 years, and it's about the shooting death of a 14-year-old boy in Louisiana at a sleepover.
Yeah, I think I know the case you're talking about. I really do.
Do you? St. Tammany Parish?
Yeah, is that the one where he was involved with the friends were involved?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And it's still unsolved. And the new DA, is under the impression that, well, one of the kids got to come forward. We don't have any new information. It really doesn't matter. You don't have any new information. We already know who was in the house.
Right. We
already know who was in the kitchen, in the very room where he was shot. So the question is, which one of them did it?
Right.
And it's a process of elimination. But they haven't done that. They haven't done that at all. They haven't charged anybody in the crime. And we're going on 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I want to bring it out to the public, talk about, his family, what they've been through, some experts, researchers and things did several reports on, did their own investigation, when the sheriff's office wasn't doing it, or the DA's office, they didn't want anything to do with this case, seemed like a cover-up. But she's had several, investigators look at the situation. So that's a bunch of things that I'm going to talk about is what the investigators have said, the private investigators,
right,
as opposed to the sheriff's office.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting.
So about this shooting in Jacksonville at the video game tournament, like I said when I spoke to you on the phone, this goes right back to our conversation a few months ago. It's something I first wrote about in 2013, right after Sandy Hook happened. I did an extensive article looking at the last 30 or 32 mass shooters and identified that all but 2 of them had either been recently stopped taking or were actively taking a class of psychotropic drugs called SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And there is an overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence that these drugs can actually contribute or cause violent tendencies in people that are taking them. I believe I mentioned the last time that in early 90s, SmithKline paid a $3 billion fine to the federal government to resolve allegations that they had failed to notify patients of the potential adverse side effects. It turns out this kid in Jacksonville, I'm going to look at the, give me a second, I'm going to look up the information that CBS reported. This kid in Jacksonville last week had been hospitalized previously for mental illness on multiple occasions. He was also prescribed antipsychotic and antidepressant medications as well. There is a serious problem here. There's a huge issue here. I stumbled onto...
How old was he? How old was he, Dan?
When he was hospitalized, or when he actually just did the crime?
Yeah, the crime.
I think he was in his early 20s.
A history of mental health issues. Where are these mental health issues stemming from, you know, in kids' lives? I don't know. From our generation, Dan,
yeah,
I just didn't see this type of, yeah, people have mental health issues. I understand that. And sometimes it's hereditary, things like schizophrenia and other, you know, mental health issues. Well, but now, 2018, why do we have all these kids on drugs? Yeah. Why are they all on psychotropic drugs? Why are they depressed? Why are they psychotic? Yeah. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned to you before, I had done a show with a guy by the name of Keith Hansen, who's an ex-law enforcement officer up in the far northeast, up in Maine. And he has a radio program on in the mornings, and I was on there with him, and he was talking about how, you know, and I don't mean to indict all teachers with this. My mother was a teacher for 30 years. My grandmother was a teacher for 30 years. But, you know, what better way to keep control of a classroom of unruly kids than have them all zombies?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, we can't have a creative-minded kid disrupting the classroom, so put them on drugs.
You know, I think it also goes with the whole Common Core thing, because the Common Core curriculum wasn't developed by educators, right? So it was developed like 3 men in a room, you know, with big money, with a lot of money. Like that would make it, like they could write curriculum all of a sudden. Yeah. But the work is very difficult from what I can see. And, you know, it would be like, I feel like my 5th grader is getting work that I was doing in 8th grade.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's really difficult, and sometimes I just want to be like, why can't you just let them be kids? Yeah, why can't they learn 8th grade math at 8th grade?
Yeah, although I have to say, I don't know, with all due respect to your position, I don't know that I can make such a connection as that, because these mass shootings were happening with alarming frequency before Common Core was ever brought about. I mean, we're going back. I think the Common Core
goes hand in hand with the psychotropic drugs.
Right.
Because, yeah, they want to, I think, they want to have the best of the best, bring the other ones down. They can't handle the work. We're going to put them on drugs. We're going to dumb them down even more. We're going to make that separation. That's what I think. I think, you know.
Yeah.
But you're right. You know, it may not have anything to do with school shootings. But here we have an incident, it wasn't a school shooting, but we have an incident of a young man having a history of mental health, being prescribed the same drugs that you were talking about on a previous show, which these drugs have certain side effects. And studies have shown that, and I read a lot of the stuff that you sent to me privately, Dan, and what I saw is that the kids were even more vulnerable than the general public. They were more even susceptible to the violent behavior using these drugs. Am I wrong?
No. Dr. Peter Breggin from Harvard has written several white papers about this, going back decades now, where he explains how the drugs can actually bring to the surface secondary or tertiary issues that have been undiagnosed, because they weren't, you know, the primary issue.
Right.
I was in researching for today. I stumbled across a report from the Citizens Commission on Human Rights for the state of Florida, And I'll send you the link to this report. And I'm going to, if there's 3 quotes I'm looking at on their first page of this report. The irritability and impulsivity from antidepressants can make people suicidal or homicidal. Dr. Joseph Glenn Mullen, Harvard Medical School psychiatrist. The link between antidepressants and violence, including suicide and homicide, is well established. Wow. Patrick D. Hahn, affiliate professor of biology, Loyola University, Maryland. Violence and other potentially criminal behavior caused by prescription drugs are medicine's best kept secret. Professor David Healy, leading psychopharmacology expert and professor of psychiatry in Wales.
Yeah, that's heavy. And they have to let us know this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talked about it before.
It's almost like a crime for keeping that information away from us. Shouldn't we know that? Yes. So when the pediatricians are handing out the psychotropic drugs, shouldn't they be saying, "Ma'am, Mrs. Okyay, first hold on, let me tell you something. Mm-hmm. This can cause violence." Why aren't they telling me that?
Right. Well, like we talked about before, I think one of the biggest reasons is big pharma contributes orders of magnitude more money to Congress and congressional candidates than the evil NRA that would even dream of. And therefore, not only do they have them in their pockets, the people that are in a position to speak out and to demand congressional hearings or investigations are either afraid to, or they don't want to lose their seat in Congress, so they're not going to bite the hand that feeds them.
When you see a connection like we do, and like you said, it's in studies with doctors, it's in our everyday lives that we see with our own eyes. It's about time that the American people really take a look at this topic. And yes, and it's the idea that, forget about the NRA. Yeah. Nothing to do with the NRA. This has to do with kids, and this has to do with our kids, and this has to do with our future. These kids are the people who are going to be the business owners, the politicians, the doctors, the lawyers. They're going to be the leaders. So we want to give them everything possible. We want them to be, right? I think any generation always wants the next generation to be more successful than them. And that's, I think everybody wants that. I don't want to keep anybody down. I think everybody's unique and different and has their own unique qualities. And I think that they're, sacred in the eyes of God. There would never be anything I would want to push people away. But these psychotropic drugs and the control of the pharmaceutical companies who are giving the most donations to the politicians who are, guess what, writing the laws that make it easy for the pharmaceutical companies to make a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And it's not, I hate to really, research, we need the pharmaceutical companies because, drugs I don't know that drugs is necessarily a bad thing, right? So drugs, right. They have cures for things, we help, people are dying, they're ill, they're sick, they need pain medication, things like that. Drugs are not necessarily a bad thing, and we need them, and we need their work. Right. But it has it's gotten to a point where they're so large and they're so controlling that we've got like half the kids in America on drugs. That's not our doing. Right. It's their doing. Oh, yeah. They want the money. Yeah. Dan, could you just bear with me 1 second? I want to go on pause because I'm out of call. So, we woke up so late and we were rushing to get on the. And I only had 1 cup. All right, let me just pause this for a while. Okay, we're back on. Luca, don't use this because I went on a little break to get some coffee. I'm going to roll in 4 seconds. I don't know where we left off, but I know it's pharmaceutical companies. So Dan, what do you think about the idea of, forcing Congress to actually look at this issue? Is there a way for us as voters, constituents, just to call our office and be like, look, I think there's a lot of studies out there I've been reading about the connection between psychotropic drugs and violence and our kids. So what about we take a look at the amount of funding that the pharmaceutical companies are protecting the politicians who are creating the laws in their favor. How do we approach this? Who's on our side? Because as far as I'm concerned, the Dems and the Repubs are in on this.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to confront them with this. So they don't want to talk about, you know, the pharmaceutical lobby. I do, though. I want to talk about it. How do I get them to talk about it?
You know, I wish I had the answer. I don't know. I don't know, other than just unbelievable amount of applying pressure. And I mean on the scale of having, you know, 500,000 people march on the Capitol in DC. I don't know exactly how, because you've got to make so much noise, and you've got and you're pushing against very powerful headwinds. It's so much easier to blame the evil NRA and blame gun owners and blame gun makers. You know, I don't know that I have the answer, but I know that we've got to do something.
Yes, I'm in agreement with that. And I want the listeners or the viewers to really understand this point. It's that I think they think sometimes that we're not concerned about children being killed, that we're not concerned about firearms in the hands of dangerous people.
Right.
The reality is that we are very concerned about that.
Yeah.
And if you were, you know, if you were involved in a, you know, concealed carry course from your state, you know, to get a permit to use a firearm, or if you went to a gun range and did a training course, or even, you know, did a training course with a private instructor, whatever the case may be, the first thing they're going to do is teach you safety.
Yep.
That's been my experience over and over again, because the NRA experts, the NRA trainers, the people who are, you know, hands-on involved, they're the most careful, you know, yeah. the most responsible, because having a firearm forces you to be responsible.
Yeah, Raquel, I mean, when I send you this study that was done by the Human Rights Commission of Florida, you are going to be flabbergasted. I'm paging through it while we're talking, looking for any, you know, specific quotes that might be germane to our conversation. And I'm learning things that I didn't even know, and I've been writing about this for 5 years. Wow. You are going to absolutely be floored by the information that's in here, and it just reinforces for me the urgent need for Americans to publicly pressure their representatives as much and as unrelentingly as possible. We have got a huge problem here, and we can take steps to do something about it that doesn't infringe on the right to keep and bear arms.
That's right. It really doesn't have anything to do with my right to keep and bear arms.
Right.
Gun control laws penalize law-abiding gun owners.
Right.
Period. That's all it penalizes, because the criminals aren't following the law.
Yeah.
They don't know the law, where the law is. They don't buy their guns legally, lawfully. They just, you know, they're already criminals. So the gun control laws only penalizes law-abiding gun owners.
And while we're on that topic, you know, we've heard, you know, David Hogg and the Parkland teens and the, you know, all this new wave of gun control. You know, we want you know, waiting periods and registration and permit to purchase and all these things that, you know, they're going to stop these events from happening. Well, the fact of the matter is, the kid in Jacksonville purchased both of those handguns in Maryland. And what does Maryland have as law? They have a 30-day waiting period. They have mandatory registration. They have a permit to purchase system. They are a may issue carry state, not shall issue. And in 2013, Governor Martin O'Malley signed a law prohibiting involuntary institutionalized persons from possessing firearms. So Maryland has basically the wish list of everything gun control fans claim they want, and they claim that will stop all these things from happening, and clearly it didn't work.
That's a really good point. That is a really good point. So he purchased his firearm in Maryland. Maryland has all of these, like you said, May issue, all of these restrictions on your gun rights, and it didn't prevent him from purchasing that firearm. This is why, if somebody is a criminal, has a criminal mind, and they are intent on committing a crime, they're going to do whatever it takes to commit that crime.
Oh, and let's add on to the fact that the location where the video game tournament was being had was posted as a gun-free zone.
Of course. Yeah, they're sitting ducks.
Mm-hmm.
A shooter, why wouldn't you, just think about it for a second. If you were a shooter, right, and you want to shoot people and you don't want to get shot, okay, they don't want to get shot, right? So the best place to go is a gun-free zone because everybody in there is a sitting duck and you know that they are not armed. It's the most unsafe place, it's the least safest place to be.
Right, and in keeping with my policy of not contributing to these people's notoriety, I'm not going to name names, but you're going to know who it was. In the Colorado movie theater shooting, they determined that that person actually went to the one movie theater in the area that posted no weapons allowed inside. It was further away from his apartment. Actually, it was further away. It was the only one that was posted where you couldn't carry, and all of those other venues were showing Batman as well.
And he passed them.
That's right.
I think he passed 2 movie theaters that did not post gun-free zones. And then he literally went straight to the place that had the gun-free zone.
That's right.
Mentally, it was on purpose. It had to be.
Yes. There has never been a mass shooting at a police station, a gun show, or a gun range.
A gun range.
Why? What is the common denominator? That's what you're taught to look for. I don't know how many, if you or your audience are familiar with the scientific term Occam's razor. Usually the simplest answer is the right one. So what is the common denominator in why there has never been a mass shooting at a gun show, a gun range, or a police station? Everyone there is armed.
Armed, yeah.
I mean, this is stuff that an elementary school kid can figure out.
Yeah. I don't even understand how the gun banners really take control of the news media. Sometimes I have to think the news media is, on board with the gun control.
Oh, absolutely. No, they absolutely are. There's an overwhelming amount of evidence to that. I laugh when people like Jim Acosta and Cuomo there on CNN and all the other, the media is not the enemy of the people. Well, guys, yes, you are. Because for 30 years, I've watched you lie by omission or lie flat out when it comes to gun control and the effectiveness of self-defense. And when you are deliberately telling lies to your audience to undermine a right and their ability to defend themselves, then as far as I'm concerned, you have in fact become an enemy of the people.
And the other thing that they do is, and this has been proven time and time again, is they come out with these stats, studies, but when you look back at the actual study and the data, it's wrong.
Oh, yeah. Just last week, did you see that NPR, of all places, that hard right-wing NPR news source, NPR did a study, and they found out that the number of school shootings was over-reported by a factor of like 12.
Yeah, I did see that article, yeah.
A friend of mine looked at the stats that are produced by the Gun Violence Archive, which is very often a source for the media. And the one thing the Gun Violence Archive is good at is they're very good at collecting news reports from around the country, but they always leave out the context. In other words, they'll collect, they'll report on, I don't know, let's say August 23rd, 3 children shot in Chicago housing project. And that's it. What they don't tell you is that those 3 children were 3 15-year-old gang members in a drug deal. They never include the context to any of these.
Gotcha.
So he actually took the time, and this guy hates math. He took the time to go back through all the incidents reported in the Gun Violence Archive for a year that they defined as quote-unquote mass shootings, and then tracked everything down and applied the proper context, which is crucial. And he found that the number of mass shootings they reported was like 236. He actually found out the actual number, when you applied context, was actually 8.
He's not the only one. John Lott, Dr. Lott also did some similar study, going back and checking the actual data.
Right.
And his conclusion was something very similar.
Yeah.
So the numbers were really influenced abroad, was outside the, like the test model.
Right.
You have to stay inside a test model. Like, it was far out of the test model. It was like time and time, like every time and time, all the numbers were all like wrong. So we have a media who doesn't like guns. They don't like the NRA. They're giving you bad information, false information, and they're actually the information, misinformation is actually dangerous.
Yes, absolutely.
It's dangerous because if you don't know the facts, how do you protect yourself? How do you know where to go forward?
Right. I mean, if you're a fence sitter, which most of the country is, they're reasonable. They don't really take an extreme position on one side or the other. But if you're a fence sitter in Topeka and you're considering buying a firearm for self-defense, and you only hear these flat-out lies of omission and these deliberate falsehoods from NBC Nightly News or CBS or whatever, and it sways you to not do that, and then you later get harmed because you couldn't defend yourself, I think one can make a reasonable argument that that's the responsibility of the news media.
I think it is. I think it is because they are supposed to be the third, like the third eye. They are supposed to be the watchdogs, the media. So it shouldn't, it should be reflective not on political parties. It doesn't matter what your political party preference is.
Right.
When you're reporting the news, there's standards to it all.
Yes. And,
you can report the news without having that inherent bias.
Right.
But you're always going to have some bias. I experienced that just myself. But when you're reporting the news, you have to report the news as it is. You got to give the attribution where it is supposed to belong, and you have to try to get both sides of the story.
Right.
But they don't do that. They have this one-way narrative, and it becomes actually dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
and let me give you an example.
Go ahead.
I live in the state of Florida.
Right.
We're like the concealed carry state of America, right? A lot of us, about 50% of us are concealed carry holders. So I take my kids. I go to a show, an outdoor show, say outdoor theater, and the place is packed. There's hundreds of people there. I know that if a crazy person just decided that they wanted to go shoot up people because they're on psychotropic drugs and they don't know what they're doing, and they wanted to come do as much damage as they wanted to, well, this outdoor theater just might be the place.
Right.
Not Florida.
Right.
Because you better believe it, though. There's like half of them, potentially half of them are armed. Yeah. So I'll tell you what, Dan, that makes me feel safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
And that's a logical conclusion. Sure. It's not emotional. I feel safe because I know that somebody's armed. And I know that being armed is a protective measure.
And it actually, it's used mostly in economic modeling, but there's something called the halo effect. And we've seen it play out, quite a few times. And basically what the halo effect suggests is that people benefit from XYZ, even if they don't personally engage in XYZ. In other words, because you live in a concealed carry state or an open carry state or a state that allows you to carry a firearm, even those that don't carry a firearm tend to benefit from the fact that criminals and predators know that there's at least a possibility that somebody may be armed.
Right. That's like, I think that's the most protective measure that you can get.
Yeah, yeah.
Just another example, there was like in the state of New Jersey, where we simply, you can't have a firearm. You got to there's exceptions.
Yep.
But you can't generally.
Right. New Jersey starts from the premise that all firearms possession is illegal, and then they carve out narrow exemptions to that blanket claim.
Right, exactly. So what happens is, all of a sudden, New Jersey has this high rate of carjacking.
Mm-hmm.
You know what that is?
Right.
That's when an armed crazy person opens up your door and tries to drag you out of your car so they can steal your car.
Yep.
That's carjacking. There was like a serious problem with that in New York at one time. But New Jersey, guess what? They got the highest rate of carjacking. You want to know why? Because the criminals are armed and the people aren't. And the criminals know that.
That's right.
That's
there was a tragic case a couple years ago.
Clear as the sky is blue, Dan.
Yeah, there was a tragic case a couple years ago at Short Hills Mall, right at Christmas time, where a newlywed lawyer and his wife were carjacked for his Land Rover in the parking garage outside the mall.
Is that in New Jersey?
Yeah, and he was trying to defend his wife, and he got killed for it.
I remember that story.
And it was absolutely tragic on multiple levels. I mean, the ambulance could not physically enter the parking garage because the roofs were too low. So they had to park at the bottom and on foot run, 4 levels up to try to get to this guy to help him. A lot of people don't realize that New Jersey has a specific state statute that exempts first responders, law enforcement, and politicians from liability for failure to protect the citizens. So on one hand, the New Jersey legislature says, we're not going to let you have the ability to defend yourself. And then they turn around and say, we're also going to exempt ourselves from any liability from preventing you from protecting yourself.
Yeah, how convenient for the politicians in New Jersey.
Right. Of course, who all either have a state police Praetorian Guard, yeah, or have a concealed carry permit because they're part of the ruling class.
Right, and they're the only ones allowed to.
Right. Right.
Same thing in New York too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I say this all the time on this show, and what we also see, and these are the facts, when you have strong gun control laws, you have higher rates of violent crime. Mm-hmm. When you have lax or less or no or little gun control laws, the crime rates are very low.
Right, and I run into this all the time with people, especially usually from Europe, but it's very common here in the States with gun control fans too, that they act or they like to pretend as if gun violence is the only kind of violent crime. Like if, they completely ignore stabbings, beatings, muggings, rape. It's as if in their minds they've decided that the only way that violent crime happens is with a firearm, and if you get rid of firearms, all violent crime magically goes away. It's childlike thinking.
Yeah, it is. It's a dream. It's a dream world. That's not going to happen, right? It's almost like I wish. I mean, the same thing.
Right.
It's still not going to happen.
Right.
So frustrating.
I mean, back to the issue about the psychotropic drugs. The only answer I have is people have got to make noise. They've got to make unrelenting noise with the media, even though we already established that they're almost always biased. With their local politicians at the county and the state and the federal, at every level. The only way any of this is going to be addressed is you've got to apply unrelenting pressure. It has to be done. Because there's a website called SSRIstories.com that's run by a court-recognized expert, and she's documented, and we talked about this the last time.
Yeah,
she's documented over 4,000 cases of unpredictable, extreme violence in people that are taking these drugs, and it's almost always a young teenager or a young man. Now, in Europe and in other countries, it's not firearms, it's hatchets, it's butcher knives, it's blunt objects. But the point that I'm trying to make is someone less dead in the United States if their 18-year-old son that's on these drugs stabs the entire family to death with a butcher knife, are they less dead than if he shot them? No. So this isn't, again, this has nothing to do with guns. This has to do with a class of incredibly dangerous drugs, and there's an overwhelming amount of evidence to support this, that are turning a certain percentage of our young people into psychopathic monsters.
It is true. Yeah, the data supports it. The data supports everything that you're saying.
Yep.
So what we're asking you all to do is to look at that data for yourself. And you can see the connection between these psychotropic drugs and the violent behavior. Now, the violent behavior isn't necessarily having to do with a firearm. Violent behavior exists outside of the firearm.
That's right.
Like you said, you have a machete, you have a knife, you have a bat, you have beatings, you have fists, you have plenty of ways for people to be violent that doesn't include firearms. And we think they're important.
Right. Yeah.
We're not gonna shove them aside because they don't follow a narrative that we like.
Right.
Okay, we're gonna look at them too because they're just as dead as the person articulated, right. As the person who was killed with a knife. I agree with you 100%. Yeah. It's a valid, important point. And I do want to mention, Dan, for the listeners and viewers, that the reason why Dan and I might suggest that you be really loud with your politicians, and this is why. It's because the politician, once they're elected, one of the primary things on their mind is re-election.
Right.
Okay, they want to keep their seat, right? So they're there, they were elected, they have their constituents, they want to keep them. Okay, they want to get re-elected. You're coming to their door, you're calling them up, you're talking to them about your issues, your complaints, and so on. Okay, they will listen. You're a voter of mine. It matters to them. But when you show up, at their Capitol office, you know what I'm saying, with 15 of your friends, 15 of your friends, and you show up there, and now the politician is, wow, that's 15 votes. And those 15 votes come with other votes, right? So one of them, tells all their friends. So it means a lot to them, and they want to see your, and it means more than just sending a couple of emails or something. They want to see your face.
Right.
It means more. Yeah. If you can do it. I mean, some people just, can't get it done, but your city council, or you want to do it on a state level. It could be, your governor. It could be your state capital, your representatives. But you gotta be like in their face and let them know that you're not alone. So it's me and all my friends, and we vote. I vote every year, right? So
yeah, and even if you can't,
what are they talking about? Let me listen.
And even if you can't get to your legislator's office, call into a radio program. Call into Rush Limbaugh. Call into any, and I don't care which side of the political aisle it is, call into any radio program that is going to give you the opportunity to bring this up.
Yes.
And is at least willing to be open-minded enough to say, you know what, that's a pretty good point that I really can't ignore. This isn't, unlike gun control groups. Unlike gun control groups and their supporters, I care about all violent crime. I care about, what if for one of your audience, and maybe they should ask themselves if it was one of their neighbors, what if it's somebody that whose kid is taking this stuff and the parents don't know about this information?
That's right.
How are you going to feel if you find out, and I hope this doesn't happen to anybody, but you're basically playing Russian roulette. At some point, you're going to know someone that this has happened to. And you now have been armed with the information to be able to stop that.
Yeah. It is. And that's all, we all want to do that. So we're all preventative measures, because it's very difficult to get things done after the fact, right? So it's already done. But what we can do is work on these preventative measures. And information is golden.
Yep.
just simply having the information. So that's why I think it's criminal that the media keeps the information away from us, because it can literally be a life or death situation.
Yeah.
If the parent may have known that these drugs have violent behavior, particularly with men or boys, well, if it's my son, I might take a step back and say, I'm going to start looking into some other methods, because
right.
I don't want to, I certainly don't want this side effect, and that's important to me. But the idea is that I get to make the decision as the parent, or the adult gets to make the decision as an adult. But nobody's who's making those decisions? The doctors.
Right.
Who are invested in the pharmaceutical companies, and
right.
people go to the, and they're kind of like, all right, the doctor said so, it must be true. Well, I'm going to follow the doctor's orders. But doctors are not, infallible.
Right.
They're going to make mistakes, and you have to be on your feet, on your toes all the time. When it comes to your health, when it comes to your rights.
Yeah.
You don't want people taken away from you.
And let me make something clear for the audience, just because I've had this happen before. This is not like the anti-vaxxing movement. Frankly, I think a lot of the anti-vaxxers are a little insane. I mean, I have some concerns about, compounded vaccines where there's 7 or 8 things in one shot, or the thimerosal, which is mercury-based. I do think there's some questions, is this really the smartest thing we could be doing? But for people to go to the route of being anti-vaccine and I'm not going to get my kid vaccinated, I think that's a little overboard. I think there's now been a report that measles and mumps are now making a comeback in the States, a disease that we had eradicated 50 years ago.
Right.
So what we're talking about today isn't on the level of anti-vaxxing. I do believe that there is a percentage of people that can be helped by these drugs.
Absolutely.
Or other drugs.
I'm glad you point that out. I agree with you too.
But
I'm not saying that people need it.
Right.
And those people, you almost take away from their need.
Right.
They really, they need it, and that's the decision. I'm okay with that too.
Right.
This is not an anti-drugs. We're not anti-drugs for people who need it.
No, not at all. But there is clearly a huge problem that is not being addressed.
Yep, the psychotropic drugs. I know. It's just awful. And I hope that people are, watching and listening, and will go ahead and go do your own research. Go ahead and look at those studies. Go ahead and look at those news reports that show this very dangerous connection between psychotropic drugs and kids and shootings, or violence rather.
Right.
So we're looking at all violence. We're not just looking at the shoot. It's not just the shooting victims.
Right.
Okay, we're looking at all violence, because evil exists and it's going to happen. We're not going to be able to prevent it always, but we can't prevent it by taking away other people's rights.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
It hasn't worked thus far.
Right.
So we know that in the data. All right, we are definitely coming down to the end of the show. I just want to thank you so much, Dan, for coming on again. You're my regular. We have a great conversation. I love talking to you. I think it's great. You'll have to come back.
Sure.
Next time you have something to talk about, you just, hey, Raquel.
Absolutely.
And you're on. Absolutely.
And I will.
I want you to have the last word.
I will. No, thanks for having me on again. I mean, I wish we had the reach of a CNN or an MSNBC. Maybe that'll happen in the future. But at this point, any outlet that I can get on to get this word out is valuable. None of us want to see these issues with mass shootings. None of us want to see these issues with violence. I mean, I mentioned, my son has been diagnosed with ADHD, and one of the things I found worked for him was coffee. As a parent, I would feel incredibly terrible if I had just, like you said, if I had just blindly followed a pediatrician and said, oh yeah, put him on this, SSRI drug and that'll fix all your problems. And then he harmed someone else. I don't know that I could live with myself, because I would feel responsible, because my child doesn't know any better. My child is looking to me as the parent to make the right decision for them. So any outlet like yours or any other one that gives an opportunity to get this message out there is valuable. And what I'll do, I will private message you the links to the Florida Commission on Human Rights and their report. I think you already have the link for SSRIstories.com and to the article I wrote on Ammo Land after Sandy Hook from the last time that we talked about this.
Okay.
And just, put them up on the site, put them up attached to this link to this podcast, and spread them to anybody you think is going to be able to put the word out.
Sounds like a good plan. I will add those links, and they will be attached to this video podcast at tlbtv.com. Thanks again so much. It's really been a great show.
My pleasure.
You have a great day.
You do the same, Raquel. Bye-bye.
Bye. Wave at the same time. I'm a pig.